And in my workshops, I'm teaching, facilitating levels so that if you do level 1 well, you're not going to get to level 2. If you get to level 2, you're not going to have to get to rubber meets the road because you have already built the foundation of your team that is so strong that I don't care what provider comes in there, your client has the floor and everybody is focused on that client, and it's just a beautiful thing.
Welcome to the Birth Education Center podcast, hosted by myself, Care Messer, an entrepreneur, birth educator, and doula. My team and I want to help you discover your options in birth and postpartum, how to find your voice, and how to use that voice to navigate our maternal healthcare system. You and your baby are not just a number. This information includes doulas too. Now let's get started. Today's show, I'm not going to say I'm excited for, but I'm super fucking excited for. I have Traci Doula here today, and Traci and I see eye to eye when it comes to doulas and advocacy, as well as parents and advocacy. But this particular show, we're going to focus on doulas and their advocacy, lack of advocacy, what they need to know about advocacy, what they might not know, and how they're presenting it to their families. Because I know I'm running into some mishaps when it comes to that wasn't clearly communicated with me with my doula, and we want to shed some light on that. Traci has agreed to come and do a training here in San Diego in October. So I want to mention her trainings right off the bat so you know what's coming up in 2024 so that you can get to one of her trainings. They are very affordable and you need one. I'm just going to say you need one. So we've got Denver in May, Spokane in July, Boston and Oregon in September, that's going to be a busy month for you. San Diego in October. Please come and play. We have ocean here. And Calgary, Canada in November. So it's a 2-day workshop. It's called Keeping Your Power for Doulas, and it's phenomenal. I've been following Traci, and it's Traci Doula if you're looking up Instagram and TikTok for a long time now and seeing, oh my gosh, we're resonating here. We need some more education in San Diego around this, and I need more education around this to help teach my families as well. So welcome, Traci. I'm glad you're here.
I am just so super excited about being here. Thank you so much for the invitation.
I'm so glad you're here. I want to start off with, you've been in birth work for over 25 years. How did you come into birth work and what's your why? Like, why are you doing this?
Birth work. So I could not sleep at night if I was not helping families somehow. And I really organically, I just love birth. I love the miraculous things around it. I always knew, even in high school, that I was going to do something in birth somehow. And then it just propelled me when I started having children, how much education gaps were locally in my local area. And I thought if I wasn't getting the education, I knew that other people weren't getting education. So I just dove in and met some really cool midwives around. But I started postpartum work first because my kids were small. That was more scheduley. And then I was a midwife assistant for 6 years and found out very quickly that I did not want to personally be responsible for 2 people. And I am fully an educator and a supporter. And that's just where my calling is. And here I am. But throughout the years in just Alabama birth work, our home birth law or lack thereof was in a place where nobody really knew what was going to happen if. So the person I was married to then, out of respect for him, I did not do home birth anymore and went to really supporting in the hospital, which clearly I needed to do. And I was glad that I was faced with that because here I am today we have got to figure out advocacy because of the system, but not just that. We can't let our guard down on home birth or midwives or those things too. We just need to fully understand what advocacy is, self-advocacy, what does that mean, critical thinking. And I think me being an older birth worker of, 50 years, yes, I'm 50, I think that newer doulas are not really grasping hold of what it means to critically think and those kind of communication skills that I think are needed to advocate.
Absolutely. And did you do hospital births with your babies? Did you do home birth with midwives?
I did. All of my babies were born in the hospital, but all of them were born with certified nurse midwives. My last was, I was preeclamptic, I was induced, but I still advocated for that midwife to be on my team, and she fought to be there.
Fantastic. And being that you have the advocacy training in the hospital with your own births, that does aid in the wheels turning when you're starting to be an educator, because speaking from experience makes a lot of sense, especially when we educate as doulas. We're like, no, I see this in the hospital. Like, I don't want to scare you. I'm just saying this is what's coming through that door.
Oh, for sure. I mean, with my first, I was 18 when I had Christopher, and I knew that if I was being treated the way that I was, that clearly there was a whole different gamut of people that were being treated the same way. And it wasn't just lack of education, it was literally misinformation. And I was being told things that made my decision making process only one way. And when I found out that things were totally different, even later when I had Emily, they're only 15 months apart, I thought, this is not okay. This is just not okay. It's amazing what I have learned in my own experiences. And I think as educators and doulas, we do come into this work a lot with, oh, I wish I had known. I don't want anybody else to be in the position that I'm in. But then we have to kind of reel it back in because bias comes in with that. And savior complex comes in with that also. So we have to reel that back in before we can truly educate and support other people.
Absolutely. And I asked Traci what the birth temperature was in Alabama, kind of having an idea. And all she said was gross. And I'm like, I hear that. So tell us, because my neck of the woods is a little different, the hippie Californians, as compared to what you've got going on, because it's making all the news right now. So what is top of the heap for doulas, midwives, birth educators in Alabama right now?
Yeah, I mean, we're just very, as a Southern culture, very traditional and very stuck in the ways of yesteryear, it seems. And nobody likes change. Nobody likes their standards of practice to be questioned. We live in a culture here that when you were raised, you were seen and not heard. And there is a mannerism part of the culture that you just don't question your doctor. And doctors like that, it seems. And, it's kind of like, this is our standard of practice. This is just what we do. And this is how it's going to be. So it's hard as far as a consumer, but then even birth workers, doulas, how do you even have a conversation with a doctor that's closed down, that has their own standards of practice or their own experiences or their own, very well intended conversations? And sometimes the doctors really don't even know that they have other options, or they're behind 20 years in the evidence practice gap. And then, of course, the midwives. It took years for us to pass that bill. I think it took 14 years for certified professional midwife law to come about. And so now there is this option that even people are like, people do that. So it's a very stuck in your ways type of culture here.
And can you do home birth in Alabama or no?
Yes. So the certified professional midwife bill passed in 2017. And yes, it's rocking and rolling. And, we had some midwives come that were out of state that have come, but the midwives that are here, that before the licensure hit, they were doing births other places. It's not like they are new. But then we have some great experienced midwives that are taking on students too. So it really is growing, but it's a lot because you have a lot of people who are loving that option, but there's not a lot of midwives.
And not enough certified nurse midwives for insurance to cover.
The thing about Alabama, we're getting a little bit off topic, but the thing about Alabama is, as a certified nurse midwife, you cannot practice in the state of Alabama unless you are sponsored by a doctor. So that cuts way down the midwifery care. And certified nurse midwives, they're only recognized to do hospital birth. So if a doctor doesn't believe in midwifery, the certified nurse midwives here in Alabama are very little because of that sponsorship. And then you have the growing number of certified professional midwives that are doing home birth. So we do still have a pretty big midwifery gap here.
Wow. And switching into advocacy, we both teach childbirth education. One of the gaps that I'm seeing, I think you're seeing the same thing, is doulas and families have a gap as well in the advocacy talk. I think some of my families go, I hired a doula. She's going to do all my talking for me. And I'm like, have you talked to her about that? So, what is the gap that you're seeing in your classes? Because this is what you teach.
Yeah, and I'm also getting, and I'm working a little bit backwards, I'm getting a lot of students that did not understand what their doula was going to do in the first place. So they didn't understand the need, but also traumatized by their doulas because the advocacy definition was not put on the table. But let's start foundationally with who really is at fault here. And I don't want to really throw that out there lightly. I do not. But throughout the years of developing my own advocacy identity, realizing that there is a huge community of doulas and douladom that were told not to advocate. And
I was one of
that
them.
comes for years and years and years. And I thought, Kara, I thought everybody was doing advocacy. I literally thought that every doula was going into, and of course, I'm an older doula, but I thought everyone was going in, talking to nurses, facilitating conversations, saying, what does that mean? Looking at my client, saying, how do you feel about that information? Getting more information out of the nurse or the doctor for my client, their patient, to critically think through this process and then say, okay, I confidently say, yes, I want that, or confidently say, no, I don't want that. I thought everyone was doing that.
And I was doing it because I was an educator. I think my educator stuff bled into the doula work because I was like, wait, they don't have all the information. Can you walk us through this, nurse or doctor? So I think that's why I did it. But a lot of my friends were like, why would you say anything? They'll kick you out. And I'm like, no, they won't. I'm not there to fight with them. I'm there to have a conversation with them. But there's,
Right.
the fear.
And where does the fear come from? Let's talk about faults a little bit. The fear was instilled when people started saying, people meaning some organizations and some trainers were saying, do not do this. And these are the reasons why. You might get kicked, might. We are using words like might get kicked out of a room. You don't need to be speaking for your clients. You don't need to be doing these things. And there's oppressive words. And if doulas don't know what they don't know, they're just wanting to serve families. They're wanting to check off these boxes and saying, oh, I can't do these things because, oh, I don't want to get kicked out of a room, or I don't want to make it harder for my client. That is the most oppressive thing. And my most frustration is that foundation of power has been taken away from doulas that should be thinking about helping their clients critically think, helping their clients get the information. I don't care if it's evidence-based or whatever, just get into the heads of labor and delivery nurses and staff, whatever that is, in presenting the information so the person can say a confident yes or no. I'm not even, as an educator, I'm even putting some of the things aside because it might not even be important at that point. I just want my client to know what their staff is saying about it and if they agree with that or if they don't agree with it. And then do we need more information about it? So the foundation has been stripped from doulas, just like birth has been stripped from people thinking that they have to go into the hospital to have a baby in the first place. And when did that happen? Back in the 40s and 50s when they were having to market birth back into the hospital. So that's what's happened with doulas in douladom is they have been taken in this very sacred, special place in the relationship. We have the strongest relationship with our client because we spend the most time with them, or we should spend the most time with them. And we should be diving deep into their belief system so that we know how to appropriately advocate for them. Because we are not saviors. Our clients do hold a huge responsibility in what self-advocacy is, and sometimes they don't know what they don't know in that either. So if a doula doesn't know their advocacy role or their advocacy identity, then your client is not going to have a clue what to even ask you in advocacy or where they even need to be in advocacy because it's just been stripped away.
Well, and even in an interview, a parent is not going to know what they need to ask about advocacy. The doula needs to be firm in their foundation of how they advocate, or if they don't advocate, say it right up front with good, clear words, because the parents aren't in that position yet of knowing what they need and what they want. A lot of times they even haven't had even a birth class yet. Sometimes they don't take a birth class. Please take a birth class. And they don't know. And if the doula just skips over that, that's where we're causing trauma that we aren't intentionally meaning to do, but they don't know what they don't know. And you not knowing where you stand on it right from the beginning is a deficit in your service.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, not understanding it, but then not even thinking, or somebody has told you that that's not something you should do. And then there's the cognitive dissonance of it, right? You show up at a birth, something happens, and you're like, how can I not say anything in my soul? How can I not say anything when I see that my client is deer in headlights or looking at me like, please say something, because I'm either disassociating, I'm fight or flight, I'm fawning, I'm doing whatever it is, trauma response that I'm doing, expecting for the doula to say, hey, what you doing? Give me some more information on that so my client can say yes or no. That's what we are literally there for. And so when a doula doesn't have that foundation of, being told that, it hurts my heart for them. It hurts my heart for doulas to have that foundation of, I was told that I can never advocate. And that's why there's so many doulas that are coming out of hospital birth work and only doing what I call safe birth work for their nervous system, which I don't fault, but I do challenge that. Because if that's why you're doing it, we need to wipe out that foundational root of somebody told you not to advocate, because that's actually not true. And if you believe in your soul that you should be doing it, then we need to figure out the trauma part of it, the cognitive dissonance part of it, your belief system around advocacy, get you an identity, and then get you some more skills.
You brought up some really good words that I talk about in my doula training, because it's not talked about in their first doula training, are disassociation, fight or flight, fawning. They don't even know what those are. So to be in a room with a family that's experiencing those, you don't know that you need to be stepping in right there and asking questions and getting your client to come back online so that they can answer a question or not, and then pause what's happening in the room because they're not here. That's so important. And I think doulas just don't know enough about that because it's not brought up in a 2-day training. There's too much of an overview of birth for us to even hit a nervous system training. And that's one of the things I'm really looking forward to in the Keeping Your Power stuff, because it is so essential for quality birth work.
Well, in my Keeping Your Power workshops, and I do a lot of mentoring too. So I was coming across individually in my mentorships the same things over and over again. You cannot be 100% for your clients until you yourself are 100%. That is bottom line. You cannot think that you're going to show up and do all of these things unless you yourself have self-reflected and you are honest about what is going on in your own world, personal, professional, I don't care, checking your biases and understanding even when I talk about biases, because we all have them. Sometimes we don't know we have them. They're experiences, they're how we're bent, they're all kind of things that can come up in some serious situations. And if we are not laying all that out with what we're responsible for, what we're not responsible for, and then in our communication skills and using perspective, it is alarming to me how many people go into conversations and don't use perspective. Do you mean that you are having conversations with labor and delivery nurses and doctors and you're not taking in consideration what they're saying? Your client has decided to give birth in that space. So that comes with the responsibility of listening to a labor and delivery nurse and a doctor that you might personally have a problem with. But guess what? This isn't about you. This is about your client. And there's a lot that goes into that. That's that first day of my workshop. And is it hard? Absolutely. But we have to remember why we are advocates to the core. We are advocates to the core because there are people dying in birth today.
At a higher rate than ever before, which is crazy.
It's crazy. It's ridiculous what we're doing over here. So we're in a broken system, and it's not just about, we're not going to talk about jumping ship, right? Well, Traci, people don't have to give birth in the system. Okay, tell me in your privileged place where that works for everyone. Okay, just have a home birth, just use a midwife, just those just isms, as I call them. Those are privileged places to be. Those are actually trauma responses, I believe, in the person that's saying it, because they don't want to dive deep into why did the core of your brain go straight to one of those isms when really what should be happening is you should be translating your advocacy power to your client's power. They're connected so that you can give them stronger self-advocacy skills so they can give birth anywhere with anyone.
Do you think that one of the obstacles for getting doulas to come on board with advocacy training is that they have been so oppressed by their doula training and they just think it's one way? And this is one of the reasons that they do jump ship from hospital birth, because it's too traumatizing for them, because they don't know how to facilitate conversations. Do you think that's the hardest part about getting them to understand that they really do need some training in this?
I think there's a lot of fear. And I think that the fear came from the oppressive words, stay in your lane, don't speak for your clients, we don't advocate. All of that is cloudy. That is some muddy waters that nobody talks about.
Agreed.
Because nobody's talking for clients. We need to shut this stuff up. And anybody that's listening to this, these needs to be further and deeper conversations on every platform when you hear this crap. Because nobody is making up information to relay to a labor and delivery nurse or a doctor. They shouldn't, okay? Nobody's relaying information like that. So all of this oppressive language is traumatizing in itself because it's the power trickle kind of thing is what I see. And yes, if they have been in a birth that is super traumatizing, so first of all, they don't have the skill because they've been oppressed. Second of all, they've been traumatized in this birth, and maybe they weren't told that they needed to advocate. They just didn't know how. And it's kind of like, okay, they're freezing, they're fawning. They're like, hey, I'm going to take you brownies so that you'll treat my client better. That doesn't happen either, guys. Respect comes from respecting each other in the workspace, not taking gifts, by the way. That's just added. That's free. Why somebody doesn't advocate is very nuanced. But I think the majority of what I see is I know I need to do it. I just don't know where to start, and I really don't know how.
Well, I know where you start. You start with your workshop.
Yes. Yes, you do. But first you start, like say you know you need skills, right? We can't obtain skills until we are teachable. To be teachable, you have to recognize that you need something that you might not have. And I want to stop here and say, I'm an educator, and you might learn something new from me, but I'm a facilitator. I am somebody that's going to take you where you are and help shine a light to where you need to be. The same thing that we do for our clients, the same thing I do for my families. So my workshop is a workshop. It's not a class. I am not PowerPointing to listing these things. Advocacy is not scripts, by the way.
I love that. Thank you for pointing that out.
Because you're going to learn a script, or your clients have learned a script. And what then? Because it's not going to blanket all birth situations. And, I love them for certain things. I love them for opening the conversation, but then what? So got to be teachable, got to go back to self-reflection, got to work on yourself first in order to even understand the communication, understand the advocacy, understand what we're doing. Because Kier, what we talk about a lot in doula advocacy in these situations is, what if the nurse does this? What if the doctor does this? What if this happens? We go to what I call level 3 rubber meets the road. And in my workshops, I'm teaching, facilitating levels so that if you do level 1 well, you're not going to get to level 2. If you get to level 2, you're not going to have to get to rubber meets the road because you have already built the foundation of your team that is so strong that I don't care what provider comes in there, your client has the floor and everybody is focused on that client. And it's just a beautiful thing. So we're not going from this hostile provider is coming in the room. So everybody needs to throw out, she's got a right to, she's got a right to. Now that is true. They have a right to. But what if we build the foundation to where that doctor comes in and they're literally having to be held accountable and their mind is actually changed, or in that moment, the conversation has changed because somebody facilitated a conversation that that doctor is now accountable for what they're saying, what their belief system is, and my client's hearing it, and my client's like, no, 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 time out. I don't have to do very much when I facilitate conversation, by the way.
Yeah. And that you're starting with your clients way before the birth room, but you have to know what your advocacy level is first before you can initiate that with your client. Because
Absolutely.
yes, they need to speak for themselves, but if you don't know where you stand in how to facilitate that, it doesn't matter what you teach them. It doesn't matter.
And that's going to be more than 2 prenatal appointments.
Absolutely. And in my contract, it was as needed because I don't know where they're coming from, but I do know that they need to be in a long childbirth class that talks about advocacy. And then we need to facilitate, how do you feel about this and what's going on in your life? And are you okay with being separated before we go into triage? And all of those things of what is important to that family is different. It's not a one size fits all rolling backpack. Here's what I do at every prenatal. Like that does not work. And
No.
I know that sometimes that's taught, but that's not what's going to serve the families the best way. Tell me a little bit about what's going on in those workshops. They sound very experiential and a lot of role play, which works really well for doulas because those questions come up and past traumas come up. So how do you do that?
Yeah. So the first day is understanding why we advocate. We talk about misinformation and really identifying the need to advocate, especially in the system. I give everybody a safe space to be and to feel their feelings around maybe they just didn't know what they didn't know. And I share stories of my days of being a doula. And I do share that I'm continuously learning too. Like I said, I'm a facilitator. I'm taking things from other people in these workshops also. And I want people to really dig deep into themselves to make sure that doula work is right for them. I mean, I've had some people like, this might not be a good idea for me right now. But my goal is to solidify the things that they need so that they can build that foundation even more solid. So the second day, we are, yes, role playing. We are not frantically trying to figure out if I did something wrong or something. And that, because that's kind of weeded out at that first day. But everything we do in the first day rolls over into the second day. And I'm like, see, that was yesterday. Remember this. Remember that that could be a bias and you've got to work on those, journal those out. What are you responsible for? Because I do feel like doulas take on way more responsibility in the birth room than we should be. So we talk about prompts from your clients. What did those look like? What you're responsible for, what you're not responsible for, what are your clients responsible for, you know, as far as communication, when, what's appropriate, all of those things. So my workshops are very casual. It's not a classroom type thing. And I love going to communities because the majority of the time people do fly in to the workshops that they want to attend, which I think is lovely because culture's different everywhere. Hey, we're dealing with this. And how do y'all deal with that? And we're dealing with other things over here. So can somebody help me figure out how to facilitate another conversation that maybe my birth culture doesn't do or does do? So that's very lovely. But I love going to communities that those birth workers work together and not only doing that troubleshooting thing with the role plays on the second day, but supporting each other in advocacy and what that looks like, because the advocacy world can be very, very lonely, especially if you have a huge doula community that doesn't believe that they advocate or that anybody should advocate. So those people are going to make it very difficult for advocate doulas to feel supported in their doula communities. So that's why I love the workshop too, because there's a lot of crying and there's a lot of loving and there's a lot of support and there's just a lot of safe space and maybe getting out some grief too, because I've caused trauma. I have.
Same.
And we have to recognize that there's a grieving process with that too. And when we know better, we do better. And I think it was Maya Angelou, and I'm probably going to butcher this quote, and I'm really sorry, but I love her so much. But she says we have to forgive ourselves for the things that we didn't know the moment that we didn't know it. But once we find that out, we have a responsibility to move forward. And there is just such a need for advocacy inside a broken system. There is. That word is just so heavy sometimes. But when I'm talking about advocacy, I'm talking about working on self, building teams, facilitating conversation, getting more education out so my client can make confident yes or no, supporting my client 100% no matter what, even if they don't research things, and then making sure that everybody on the team is being listened to because they all have a place also, and we're all in this together for our clients and a really good birth outcome. A really good birth outcome does not mean a vaginal birth unmedicated.
It means a non-traumatized birth.
Yes. A good birth outcome is non-traumatized and psychologically whole.
Which can be done when even if they've done all the things that you think, my bias says it has to be unmedicated with no interference. That's not your birth. And if your client feels safe to do XYZ, you do support 100%. And still facilitate the conversations and have the interaction so they can get all the information. Because a lot of times, just like you said, we get one-sided information to get us to pick a certain thing. And that is one thing as an educator that drives me absolutely insane. And I don't want families to be operating from, I wish I only knew, because I was in the room. I could have facilitated a little bit better with that, because that's the last thing I want to do is let them down when I already know them really well.
We fuss and fuss and fuss about doctors and labor and delivery nurses that do that, right? That's what we're talking about is advocacy. And we fuss and fuss and fuss about doctors or labor and delivery nurses that come in and say, you have to have that IV. And wherever you're going, they don't have to have the IV, right? But if we're only giving one side of the story because of whatever, and I use the example of delayed cord clamping, I don't say wait for white. I don't give a time. I don't do anything. What I do educate on is do not give the authority of your cord over to somebody else. Ask them for permission to clamp the cord first. If you're good with what the cord looks like or whatever you want that cord to be like, then that's when that doctor can cut it or clamp it. But I'm not spelling out quick fixes. And I'll tell my TikTok crowd this every day on my live. I'm not going to be somebody that's, here's your 3 tips for so-and-so and so-and-so. It's about critical thinking. It's about getting clients to literally think through their own belief system and what they're comfortable with so that they know where to steer the route to.
Traci, I think that's one of your superpowers. It's so sexy to watch your lives. Follow her on TikTok and watch her lives. They're so phenomenal because you are so good at helping a family self-reflect on what their actual belief systems are. And sometimes they don't even know what their belief systems are because they don't have enough education around it. But that comment will pop up and you'll say, well, let's talk about that. And all of a sudden they are thinking, oh my gosh, I don't know enough about that. They'll start getting research and then they pop on in 2 weeks and say, oh my gosh, you told me this and this, and I thought about this, and now I know exactly what I want and how to do that. That bit of information is going to get passed on to their doula, who hopefully has done the same kind of work. So how do you reflect that? Because I'm watching you do it to parents all the time. How are you doing that with doulas in your workshop?
I kind of do it the same way. I hold people, and I'm also a life coach. So I'm always trying to get people to love themselves. The foundation of my Keeping Your Power concept is everyone has worth. And whether I believe everybody has worth, they might not believe they have worth. So if I'm steering somebody to, I don't know what's, you know, Traci, what do I do? I don't know. What do you do? And I see people just really struggling to believe themselves and value what their own belief system is because, yeah, you might not know what you don't know, but you have a belief system. How do you think about that? And it's like, I don't know what I think about that. Just because the evidence is out there, just because there's information out there, that doesn't mean that I have to agree with it. It doesn't mean that our students, clients have to believe it. So what my goal is for people to dive deep into their own belief system is to make sure that first they value themselves. Are they worth their own self-advocacy?
Absolutely. It's key and critical for doulas and clients. We're just not serving our families until we know that. So, and that's what I go over too. So, exactly the same thing. What would be your best piece of advice for doulas in figuring out the starting foundation for their own advocacy?
I would put them in their births. I would tell that doula, if they have done births, what is the most difficult part of that birth. And if you never moved forward in your advocacy identity, say, like, I'm too scared of it, I don't want it, are you going to continue to do births without that identity and be giving your clients a safe space to birth? And this sounds really harsh, but if you are supporting birthing families, there will always be opportunity for a doula to need to know an extra step of advocacy. So if you're not willing or you don't think that you're able to go forward with that, please, in your interview with the people that are hiring you, to only say that you are there for emotional support and physical support, and that is all. That is your only job, so that they know.
Amen. Say it up front.
You don't want to set somebody up for trauma later thinking, oh, I thought that they were going to say something to the nurse, or, oh, I thought they were going to say something to the doctor, and it didn't happen. So if you as a doula are not comfortable with the advocacy conversation at this point, for some reason, reach out, let me know. Let's talk about that reason why. But if you are never okay with it, please let your interviewees know that I'm only there for emotional support and physical support. And I want to say this, that there are some doula organizations that are only cranking out doulas and their perspective and perception of doula work that are only emotional and physical support. So if you are a parent listening to this, please, in your interview, ask that doula, what is your philosophy on advocacy? Are you just going to support me in emotional and physical support, position changes, pressing on back, texting for the labor support thing? Or do you go that extra step in advocacy? And what does that look like for you? Because some doulas will say, oh, I'll advocate for you. And that only means to remind you of the things that you said to your doula in your prenatal appointments, not facilitating conversation with staff. So make sure that your advocacy definition is the same, that y'all have the same definition that needs to meet the need.
Yeah, because it's so different. And I've had families say, I want a doula who's going to speak up for me. I'm in labor land. I don't want to have to facilitate conversations and all that kind of stuff. And she luckily had a doula that said, you know what? I don't speak up for my parents. I am there for emotional and physical support. It sounds like you want a doula with a little more experience that's comfortable having those conversations. And at this time, that's not me. And I was so glad she told her that, because she's like, we need more names, because that's just not going to work for me for where I'm at for this first birth. But I'm so glad she told me. And I was like, thank you for telling her that, because a lot of times they want the job. And so they'll say whatever they need to say. Please don't do that.
So much respect for a doula who knows her limits.
Absolutely. And she's a newer doula. And I was really proud of her for being that, because I didn't hear it from the doula. I heard it from the parent that's one of my students. And I was so proud of her. I was like, good job, because that's how it should be. Know your boundaries. And I think advocacy has a lot to do with boundaries. And a lot of times we have no boundaries when it comes to birth work, which this training is going to help you sort that out as well. I think it's going to give you more confidence. That's why I wanted it back in my community, because we have tons of doulas here, tons of hospitals, and we build connection when we take trainings together and we have those deep conversations, and we can back each other up when there is some kind of a trauma in a birth. When you've had doulas and friends that have trained in the same thing, you speak a different language, and it makes a huge difference in processing and staying with the work rather than saying, I'm out. That was too much for me, because some births are like that. And I've been to several. We need more community and more connection when it comes to our similar trainings. So thank you for being here today. Where can our listeners find you, and where can doulas find you for these trainings this year?
Yeah, so I'm tracidoula.com. If you're a parent, you go to the parent section, all kind of things for parents, and then doulas, of course, in the doula section. The tracidoula.com birth worker section really goes into the testimonies and things, people that have taken the workshop that would be really helpful too. I'm on Instagram, I'm Traci Doula there, and then TikTok, Traci Doula 4. And yeah, I do try to go live every day, and we have great conversations. Birth workers are on there too. Labor and delivery nurses, some OBs follow me too. So we have some really good conversations over there. And of course, if you have a simple question about services or the workshops, please reach out. But I don't answer just birth questions or, hey, this is what my doctor said today. I do have coaching calls for that. I am also a life coach. I have been doing life coaching for birth professionals like midwives that are totally burning out, those kind of things. Definitely doulas also, debriefing births. Those are all in the shop at tracidoula.com. So a lot of availability, trying to just, I just want to hold space for both families and birth professionals, because we are just all in this together, folks, all in this together.
Absolutely. And I thank you for your work, because it's really, not only is it needed, but I respect what you're doing in the birth community, because you're not quiet about it. And we can't just sit and watch trauma happen. And we also can't not understand how we could be accidentally causing it, even if it's not our intention. And I believe when we connect to do birth work with these people, we have prior contracts from another lifetime, maybe. And it's our job to facilitate the best cohesive birth experience for these families. And we're the professionals stepping in for these families. Like, it's our obligation and it's our responsibility. So thank you for being here today, Traci, and sign up for one of these trainings. And we'll see you guys all next week.
Thank you so much, Kara.
Thanks for joining us today. And remember, it's your body, your choice, and finding your voice is your power. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us in all the places, and go to birtheducationcenter.com for our blog and more online education classes. And we'll see you next week.